Inside the rec room, there were couches and flat screens. By each couch, there were remote controls for the screens and video game controllers. The game was a multiplayer shooter with player versus player. The kids quickly picked teams and started playing. The game and the controls were modified somehow, allowing players to use superhuman reflexes. Back home, Midas could never be beat at something like this. His reaction time was so much faster than normal. He thought these games were boring. But to his surprise, IQ was able to match him on most everything. Not because he was fast, but because he instantly came up with great strategies. Jack was the one who owned the game. After a few rounds, they all ganged up and just hunted her. Midas looked over at her playing and noticed her fingers didn't move. Is it cheating if she thinks directly into the game? No more than super speed or reading your mind, said a girl's voice with a Russian accent behind them. Everyone but Omni looked back to see the new person. Omni quickly took advantage of the situation and killed Jack's player in the game. Yes, that's one for me, he said loudly. He then turned around with the others. Behind them were the two they had seen come in earlier. The gang playing video games introduced themselves as they did before. Midas liked these introductions better. He was now one of the gang and not the new kid. The girl introduced herself as Zoner, a Russian with the power to read minds and open dimensional portals. She elaborated. It's like opening an HU port, a doorway to somewhere else. Zoner was medium-sized with blonde hair and blue eyes. She was beautiful and said she was 13, but looked more mature and dressed maybe too mature. The boy said his name was Knight and that he was from Vancouver, Canada. He was to super-powered armor as Armory was to weapon systems. Knight stood 6 feet tall and said he was 15. He had black hair, brown eyes, symmetrical looks, and seemed to be taking everything in. Omri jumped up and shook Knight's hand. I have a feeling that we will end up being great friends. Here, there's room on this couch, he said as he cleared a spot for Knight. Zoner sat down by Jack and talked to her as the two new people joined in the game. Midas tried to figure out why Zoner immediately sat down next to Jack. As he played, he rolled the idea through his head a bit. Jack is the only one that didn't look twice at the way she is dressed, Midas thought. The boys oogled, and Hollow quickly looked away. I bet she went over by Jack because she felt more comfortable, he thought. Zoner then looked over at Midas and smiled broadly while making eye contact. She's reading my mind right now, he thought. Midas didn't like someone hearing his thoughts one bit. He looked away and realized that probably wouldn't help. Midas then concentrated on the game as hard as he could not to let any stray thoughts in. He started playing much better. In the game, Midas started beating out IQ and giving Jack a really hard time. Wow, what's gotten into you? You weren't playing this well earlier, Jack said to Midas. Midas now had tunnel vision into the game. He was unaware of the telepath in the room or the others around him. There was just the game. Jack was still beating him, but he was putting up a great fight. IQ was now helping Midas go after Jack. IQ started to egg him on. Whatever you're doing, don't stop. Move left. Go around. Watch the top. Midas could barely hear him. He sounded far away. He heard his own heart beating fast and loud. Somehow, he had forgotten how to breathe and took a deep breath, and another. His controller started to feel strange in his hands. Something's wrong with him, Zoner said loudly as she stood up. Midas pulled her down and tried to calm down, but couldn't. He closed his eyes and tried to think. My inhaler is in my room. There's some inhaler in his room that stops his power from going off. It's dangerous, Zoner said. What room? Asked Port. No time. Get him outside and far away from the school, Zoner said frantically to Port. Port reached out a hand and touched Midas. In an instant, they were in the desert over 1,000 yards from the hotel. Midas looked up at Port and said, Go! Port was then gone. Midas looked up at the school in the distance. He forced his eyes to clear, then looked around him. The feeling inside of him was like nothing he had ever felt before. It needed out. Midas fell to his hands and knees. Looking straight at the ground, he wanted the power out of him. A steel parking lot in the desert, he thought. It was as if his vision instantly cleared. Midas stood up. He felt fine. He looked around him and saw a desert landscape made out of shiny steel. Midas felt his wits quickly return. I'm okay, he thought loudly, knowing someone was listening. Port appeared with a tall blonde woman just a few feet from Midas. My name is Miss Hanson. I'm one of the coaches here. Are you all right? She asked. Joseph was stunned as he looked at her. She was impossibly good-looking. Are all of these girls going to grow up to be super good-looking? He thought. I said, are you all right? Miss Hanson said again louder. I feel fine now. He felt embarrassed for causing such a scene. This is why I'm here. I can't control my powers. Saying that made him feel like he wasn't Joseph anymore, but this new Midas. I understand. I read your file. But you were given orders to keep your inhaler on you and avoid stress. Everyone telling him what to do and not having choices was getting old. Orders? I'm not a soldier. I'm 11, he said with a little attitude. Miss Hanson made a pained face and then said, You're right. This is the Academy's fault for not watching over you until you learn how to use your powers. She took Midas by the hand and started to walk back across the steel desert. Thank you, Port, for getting me out here so fast. Port was walking with them. That's why I'm at Alpha, to help. Ahead of them were their new friends standing outside of the hotel. With them were several HU reps and techs who all came to see what the emergency was about. Are you all right? Asked Jack as they came closer. He's fine, said Miss Hanson. A bot came running up to them as quick as any regular human could. The bot handed Miss Hanson Midas' inhaler and said, Is this the item you wanted? Yes, thank you, she said and took the item. Miss Hanson then looked at Midas. This stays on your person until your assigned coach tells you otherwise. Do you understand? She handed him the inhaler. Yes, keep it on me at all times. Miss Hanson then looked at Zoner. Thank you for averting something that could have been very bad. Before Zoner could say thank you, Miss Hanson continued. I want you to stay close to Midas and make sure this doesn't happen again. With that, she looked back at a large piece of desert that shined in the sun. Can I go and take a look at it? IQ asked as he pointed out at the shiny steel desert. Miss Hanson regarded the curious boy. Take someone with you and be back in 15. Everyone else, go wash up. The food you wanted is ready. Inside, Midas went to the elevator and noticed Zoner was right behind him. I'll be fine, go wash up, he said. Coach said watch, I watch, Zoner said right behind him. On the way up the elevator, she broke the silence. Do you really think my clothes are too much? Midas thought for a moment on how to put things delicately. He then thought it didn't matter. She would hear the real thoughts anyway, might as well be blunt. Your clothes are not too much. They're not enough, and what you're wearing is too tight. Zoner was quiet and stared at the front of the elevator. Her face clearly looked upset. So much for speaking my mind, he thought. Saying something and thinking something are two different things, she said. Do you want everyone to look at the way you're dressed and think bad things? There's nothing wrong with looking good, she answered as she followed him out of the elevator. I'm not a mind reader, and I know you're dressed to get people's attention. What's wrong with attention? Nothing. Look, you're pretty, smart, and an alpha-level super. People will always give you attention. You should want the right kind of attention. Did you say I was pretty? She looked at Midas. Midas thought for a moment and figured nothing was going to come out right. Midas started to blush and his mind raced. He remembered something his dad told him about being funny and entertaining in situations like this. I mean, if you joined a gym or something, maybe you could fit into human clothes. That's what I did before I came here. I lost almost 50 pounds. He opened the door to his room. Zoner held the door open as he went in to wash up. She had been reading his mind while he thought. I think your dad is a pretty smart man. I would have to agree. He taught me a lot about how to deal with people. When they were finished and walking to the elevator, she asked to go to her room to wash up and change for dinner. Midas sat outside her door while she changed. When she came out, she was wearing something more like a 13-year-old would wear. I didn't mean you needed to change now, he said. No, but when I read your mind, I heard something your dad said. Something about how we want others to see us. Well, I'm glad that lecture helped you, because it was lost on me. He made Zoner laugh slightly as they reached the elevator and headed down to dinner.